Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, I'm a little bit on location today. I'm in Toronto in preparation for the Ontario election, but how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Busy week so far, Eric. As you know, I went to the Liberal leaders candidate debates, both in French and in English. Tons of polls. I mean, it feels like we're in a writ period. Well, I know about Ontario, but it feels like we're in a writ period federally as well. There's tons of polls. And it seems like we're repeating ourselves from last week, but also tons of movement and trends that are confirmed. So, yeah. And how are you doing in Toronto? Because remember the second T, we have to pronounce it, right?
No. We're not supposed to announce it. We're not supposed to pronounce the second T. That was the whole thing. Everything is good. I'll be doing the CBC's radio show on election night. So, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably find it on the internets. And if you're listening to this, then you like listening to things. So try and find us on the radio. Since I am in a hotel room, there are various sounds happening. My fridge next to me is running. There might be a cleaning person who will knock on the door at some point. So I will do my best to clean up any of the audio. So my apologies ahead of time if it sounds a little grainy. Anyway, we have, as you mentioned, lots of new polls out. Oh, yeah. And as you said, it really does feel like a writ period. The amount of movement we've seen in the polls in the last couple of weeks is just extraordinary outside of a writ period. It would be extraordinary inside a writ period. Yeah. And it's just remarkable after a year and a half of the Liberals just falling, sliding, deteriorating, that suddenly they could pick up almost 20 points.
Incredible.
And suddenly be in a position not only to win an election, but actually maybe win a majority. It's just kind of insane. How do you explain it? Explain it to us, please.
Well, I mean, 2 months ago, I think just before Christmas, we had our episode, and I think we chose the title. It was something that I said during the podcast, and it was the polls went from bad to sad. You remember that?
Yeah.
And it was true, and the reason why I said it was now sad, and I didn't mean by sadness, I mean by it's pathetic. It's because nothing was getting better, and every month it seemed like the Liberals were sliding even so. A little more. And when we saw those 28-point lead for the Conservatives, we figured, okay, the best scenario for the Liberals is to make a slight comeback and to not completely be destroyed. If they finish second, if they win 50 seats and overtake the bloc for official opposition, that would be a good result. Now, fast forward January, Monsieur Trudeau resigns. Well, at least announces resigning. And then the turmoil with the United States, the leadership race, which is getting a lot of media attention, rightfully so. The person winning will be prime minister, but it hasn't been that exciting. Perhaps I'm reading the TVs wrong. And then we have 3 polls this week. 4 polls, actually. Ipsos, Léger, the Nanos, the Tracker usual, and Ecos. I don't know how you want to go through them, but I want to start it with Léger, because Léger is testing the Mark Carney name, which is interesting because you can see the generic ballot and the bonus that Mark Carney, hypothetically, should he win the leadership, would bring to the Liberals. So the generic ballot for Léger was 38 Conservative, 35 Liberal, best Léger poll for the Liberals since 2023. And when you add Mark Carney in there, the Liberals gain 5 points, go to 40%. The Conservatives do not move, stay at 38. You look at the regionals, as you said, this would be very close to a Liberal majority with Mark Carney. Eric, your thoughts? What do you make of these numbers?
Well, the polls have gone, I guess, from sad to maybe mad, in the sense that they are insane.
Yes. That's
it's
right there.
I mean, we can start with the Léger poll itself with the generic ballot. 38 for the Conservatives is a good number compared to the, 33 they got in the last election.
34, yeah.
But it's one of their worst numbers we've seen in in over
18,
a year,
18 months.
right?
Yep.
Like, that's not a very good number, 38. It's a good number in the context of the past, but not so much in terms of the recent past. And for Carney to then push the Liberals up 5 points, a lot of it coming from the NDP and the Bloc, right? Because the Conservatives don't really budge, but the NDP goes from 14 to 11. And we talked about last week how the NDP was in deep trouble. I ran some numbers on how the NDP would do with the kind of Carney numbers we've seen from Léger, but also recently from the Angus Reid Institute and Palace Data. And my seat projection was three seats for the NDP. Do
you remember what they were? Which one? Do you remember?
I don't recall. I think they might have been... No, I don't remember. I'd have to look them up. But they were all on the bubble. Like, their range went from 0 to 6. So... it's just a remarkable amount of change we've been seeing. Like, you look at the Wikipedia page for opinion polling in 2025, it's just red line goes up. It's just very, very straight. And I think what I find most interesting about this is not the Carney numbers, because Carney's a hypothetical. People are kind of putting on him a lot of things that they maybe hope he is, and maybe he won't turn out to be.
Yeah.
But the fact that Léger, again, I've said this a couple times, and their polling says... Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, Jagmeet Singh's NDP, that the Liberals are getting 35. And then you look at the other polls that came out recently. So Ipsos had a 2-point lead for the Liberals, and that was a generic ballot just saying Liberal Party, Conservative Party. Ecos has a 1-point lead for the Liberals. That, again, is a generic Liberal Conservative Party. And Nanos, which does the same thing, and is a 4-week rolling poll, so it includes lots of older data, only has the Liberals behind by 4 points. Yeah. So even before Carney takes over, if he does, we seem to be in a tie.
Exactly. It's not just a Carney effect. If this generally the Liberals have pulled themselves off, and they will say thank you to Mr. Trump, of course, and everything that happened in the United States. But this is not just the leadership race. This is more than that, because those polls prove it. I want to pull a set of numbers here, because we know there can be cross-pollination with federal and provincial. And right now, with the Ontario election in full swing near the end, it's ending tomorrow, we know that there is voter confusion between the brands. But so when we look at the Léger poll, the generic, we're using Justin Trudeau. In Ontario, the numbers are 46 Conservative, 34 Liberal. Now, that's a 12-point lead for the Conservatives. That's a healthy lead for the Conservatives. I mean, I think Stephen Harper in 2011 had, 45% in Ontario. That's a good number. So then Léger asked, okay, now if Mark Carney is leader of the LPC, who would you vote for? The number's 44 for the Conservatives, 36 for the Liberals. So they barely move. Move. The effect is in BC, the effect is in Atlantic Canada, and the effect is in Quebec. So would that be enough to push them over the edge? I'm not so sure. Perhaps, again, Mark Carney effect in Ontario is damped by the cross-pollination. Those Ontario numbers will make more sense, I think, when the Ontario election is over.
Yeah. It could be boosting the Ontario Liberals a little bit because they're not polling as high as the federal Liberals right now. So they could be dragging them up a little bit. But those Ontario numbers would be the thing that would keep the Conservatives in a position to win more seats. But we have seen some other polls that aren't as friendly to the Conservatives in Ontario, with Carney mentioned, without Carney mentioned. And again, I just need to mention it from last week. We got a 12 for the NDP in Ecos, a 12 for the NDP in Ipsos, a 14 in Léger, and the 16 in Nanos, which is the best one, again, has polling from 4 weeks ago included in it. The NDP is in a lot of trouble, and now the Conservatives are a bit in trouble too, because a tie is not a good result for them, because they beat the Liberals in the popular vote by about a point, a little bit over a point in each of the last two elections, and got beaten by about 40 seats, right? And what happens when the Liberal number gets even higher, their seat efficiency actually starts to get even better, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you do have the two parties somewhere in the high 30s, you do get the Liberals potentially up to the 172 that they need for a majority government. It was like a 25-point lead.
That's insane.
For the Conservatives. Not even
on
2
the
months
average.
ago.
On the average,
On the
it was
average.
25.
And now we're talking about a near tie. It is just the polls have gone kind of crazy, and you don't see this.
No.
You rarely see it in an election campaign. So to see it outside of one, but because it's so bizarre, because it's so extreme, it makes me think that it
not
is real? Well, it's a house of cards. It's built on sand. It could change just as quickly. It seemed to me that with every day that passed, with the Conservatives leading by 20 points, that it was getting baked in. It was getting more concrete.
Yeah.
Apparently, no, it was all Jell-O. So it makes it seem like these numbers too could just be Jell-O as well.
There's a proof here. I know most people listening to us knew this, but if we compare ourselves to the United States, Canadians are much, much less partisan politically than Americans, right? In American election, 3-4 points swing every election, right? We're talking about the Trump landslide in 2024, and he won the popular vote by 1.5 points. So the fact that the Conservatives went from the high 40s in several polls, and now, Leger, Ipsos, Ecos, all of them have them below the 40% mark, shows me that this was really soft support. That Pierre Poilievre was getting soft support because he was not Justin Trudeau. But right now, the Liberals and maybe Mark Carney, maybe they get that soft support back because they're not Pierre Poilievre. So I will keep looking for those favorability numbers, those approval numbers of the leaders. We talked about it last week, the Angus Street Institute. When we see Pierre Poilievre with a minus 55 rating in Quebec, perhaps this could explain why suddenly some Francophone Quebecers who were supporting the Bloc before Christmas are now saying, you know what, maybe Carney is a good option. Again, I'm not sure I get that reasoning, but the numbers right now, I want to say they don't lie. It's just there's too much of it by high-rated firms to just deny it outright. So yeah, it's truly astonishing. To be continued, of course. I will update my website. And by the way, if you want to see all those beautiful curves that Eric just mentioned a minute ago, don't go on Wikipedia. Go on 338 because those curves are much prettier. And they support independent media, my friend. I'm kidding with you, but I'll update on Sunday. And right now, looking at these numbers that I will add onto the pile, the confidence intervals will overlap significantly between Liberals and Conservatives, and the Conservatives will not be in a majority position as they were last Sunday in the update.
Okay, if a lot of this is based on the idea of Carney, we got the reality of Carney over the last few days. There was leadership debates in Montreal on Monday in French, on Tuesday in English. There was only 4 candidates. Ruby Dalla was disqualified for 10 violations of the contest rules, according to the Liberal Party. She does not speak French, so it would have been awkward, that French debate. But it didn't prevent the French debate from being a bit awkward anyway. So you were there.
Yep.
The numbers had a correspondent at the debate.
That's right.
And that was you. So you were there both for English and French. So I'd like to know what your impressions are of both of those debates and how much you think they will have an impact on the rest of this race.
Okay, let me start with the French debate. And I would like to start with the French of each candidates. Not as much what they said, but how they said it and how they managed with their French. Again, I know many English Canadians think that Quebecers and Francophones throughout Canada put too much emphasis on language. Okay, that's your opinion, it's fine, but think back of Stéphane Dion's English, okay, and how bad it was, and how it was a struggle every time he spoke in front of a camera. Well, Dion's English was better than all the French that we hear sometimes from candidates, Anglophone candidates. I want to say this, Monsieur Baylis. Even though I don't think he will be much competitive in this race, the numbers suggest that he should, he's battling for third or fourth place. did not at all make a fool of himself. He sounded great. He sounded great in French. He, of course, we know he's from Montreal, but he's an Anglophone. His French was near perfect, no word. Karina Gould, French, really surprised me. I did not expect this. I know she practiced a lot. I had heard her speak French before, but I didn't see before the fluency, how the sentences made sense, right? She was not saying only words. She was saying complete sentences, and she sounded great. As for the other two, the front runners, if you will, the early debate for Miss Freeland was really hard because, again, it was words, not sentences. And Miss Freeland does not speak Québécois French. I know that sounds super mean because I know it's hard to learn another language, especially French, with all these declinations and conjugations and verb tenses. But she speaks Parisian French, whereas Mr. Carney struggled, but you could see that the struggle was not because he didn't have the words. He has the vocabulary. He doesn't have yet the delivery. For me, it reminded me of a good comedian that has a good joke but cannot put the punchline in the right place. So this was a practice run for the general, of course, for whoever wins. It was incredibly boring, but it's okay. It's four Anglophones trying to speak French in a debate that was mostly consensual. There were no sparks. They did not disagree on anything important. So I think the exercise was interesting. But also, 2 hours is too long. Like after 90 minutes, I was like, man, I'm done with this. And so this is my early impressions. But you watched it too, Eric. What did you think of the
I didn't catch the entire French debate. I tuned in at one moment, and the one moment I caught was Mark Carney's silly mistake on Hamas and saying he agreed with Hamas. Obviously not what he meant to say. Obviously not what. So like anybody who was attacking him about it on the substance was out of left field. But on the fact that don't make a big mistake like that on a debate stage, that's a fair criticism. I wonder if it really is going to matter that much.
No.
Because the polling we've seen...
You mean the slip-up? Or
No,
itself?
just in general. Just in general. Carney's French. Because we've seen in the polling in Quebec that the Liberals are doing super well when they mention Carney.
Yeah.
And I got to think that Quebecers are already a little bit aware that his French might not be up to par. So maybe it's not going to matter that much. I don't know. I think there is usually that native son element in Quebec. Yves-François Blanchet's going to be there, so he already has that advantage. But when it comes between Carney and Poilievre, I'm not sure if it'll actually matter that much if one is stronger in French than the other, because I think that they will both be perceived to be non-Quebecers, so they will be graded on a different curve. But it was, I think, below expectations. So I don't think that Carney had a good French debate. Gould, I think, was above expectations, so I think she helped herself there. And I caught most, or at least, a good half of the English debate. And I think Gould also helped herself in that one. And I think Carney did exactly as we expected maybe him to do in that debate. But since you were there in person, what were your reflections on the English language debate?
Well, again, the fluidity was there. It was a big contrast with the day before in English. For Mr. Carney,
how was their English? Do you want to grade their English?
No, I don't. It was all good, no problem, better than mine. But Mark Carney in English, that's the thing, is that the man is mostly, I would say, he's a stoic guy. Like, this guy is not going to embark you on a roller coaster of a speech, right? But he has the right words, and he has ideas that I think are interesting for the party. He did not unfold all his platform, nor should he. This is a leadership race. This is not the general yet. Eventually, I think people and the media from left to right will have to press him on it, even though they did that. I watched the questions after the debate last night, and he's facing a lot of questions that what he says is not very much detailed. But again, this is a leadership race. It doesn't have to be detailed. It was not a debate for the general population. It was for Liberal members, right? It was trying to sway their vote. And I get that. But nothing came too much out of that. The question I have for all four, however, is let's say you do not win the leadership. Will you be part of the Liberal Party in the coming election? Because that's important for me. Like, for instance, if Monsieur Bayliss loses, as we kind of expect that he will, the performance that he gave in those two debates tells me that he could be part of the Liberal team going forward. Now, does he want to? That's the question. Karina Gould, we knew before the race began, Eric, that Burlington would be incredibly hard to win for the Liberals. She was heading for defeat. Now we're not so sure. Will she run even though she loses? And with Chrystia Freeland, she kind of said she was still running, but we'll know. I mean, the day after, if let's say she loses the leadership on March 9th, does she guarantee she will run again and be on? That's what I'm most interested in, because Mr. Carney, that was a big surprise for me. He was asked the question, if you do not win the leadership, will you run in the next election? And he said yes. He's going to be there, at least that's what he said. So,
well, there's zero risk, right? If you lose the leadership race and you decide that in the end you don't want to run, who cares? It's not going to hurt you. You're no longer running anymore. What difference does it make? So, you can take what everybody says with a grain of salt. Obviously, they have their word and they don't want to look like they're liars.
Yeah.
But it won't cost them that much if they decide not to run again. But for Bayliss, I do wonder, if he doesn't run again, what's the point of this? Why is he in this race? There's no chance he was going to win it. What's he doing?
He was good in French.
He's got to run.
Again, I'm not judging his ideas or his vision, but he handled himself really well in the French debate, and I think he could get more than just a few little points here and there if when the votes are counted. He could get lots of second place votes, so we'll see.
Okay, let's move on to Ontario. This is why we're recording on Wednesday instead of Thursday, because we wanted to at least have something to say about the Ontario election that would have a bit of a shelf life. We are going to do another episode, a little bonus one on Friday morning, just on the results, and we'll talk about how right and or wrong we were. So we've had a lot of polls come out over the last little while. They're all the same that we've seen throughout this campaign. So we got new polls from Léger, Main Street, Nanos, Relay, Liaison, Innovative. They all have the PCs between 42 and 48%. They have the Liberals between 28 and 32%, and the NDP between 16 and 19%. So it's all pretty clear where the parties are. There's a big gap between, PCs winning by 10 and the PCs winning by nearly 20.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually, it doesn't change the fact that it's a PC majority. But it does start to get a little bit more complicated when we're trying to project who finishes second in the seats, how many seats can they win. Yeah. That is the question I have right now, and I don't really know. My gut goes anywhere from both the Liberals and the NDP fighting for official party status, let alone official opposition. And maybe the Liberals doing a lot better than we expecting and getting over 20 seats. I just don't know.
I'll tell you this. So I talked to some, of course, since I was at the debates and there were lots of media there. They asked me for some scenarios in Ontario. So just plug in some numbers. Of course, these are rough estimates, but with the model that I use, scenario where the PCs win by 20. Okay, similar to the previous Léger poll we had, so 48 PCs and 28 Liberal. That gives me 104 seats for the PCs. I think that's too high, but that means that all the toss-ups, all the close races go all the same way to the blue team. But what's most interesting, and here's what I want to ask you, Eric. So the 2 or 3 scenarios that I tried, the NDP was from 16 to 19, right? It's not that big a gap. Statistically, 16 to 19 is incredibly small. But at 16%, the NDP is in single digits. At 19%, they win 20 seats. So it's a very, very steep, efficient curve. The NDP vote is not efficient at 15 or 16, but it is at 19 and 20. And so that's why I think there's so much uncertainty around who will form the official opposition, because I think we know where the Liberals will fall, but the NDP could be all over the place. It could be 6 seats, or it could be 25. But
some
none
of
of
that
these
does impact the Liberals too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Liberal seat count will change, and I'm looking at the Léger poll in Ontario that was released this morning, just before we started recording. So this, let me pull up the numbers. So 47 PC, 28 OLP, 17 Liberal. So this is a 19-point lead for the Conservatives. And the regionals, oh my God, Eric, the regionals in Toronto, if in the 416, 40 for the PCs, 37 for the Liberals, 15 for the NDP. Can the NDP hold all of their fortresses in
Nope.
Toronto with those numbers? The answer is no, right?
Nope.
And I look at the GTA, okay, it's a smaller sample, but the GTA we know is seat rich, as we said many times.
Oh yeah, I hear it's also vote rich.
58% for the PCs, 24 Liberal. So that's a sweep. That's a sweep.
That is a sweep. That's 30 for 30
Everything.
for sure.
So if these numbers from Léger are correct, the PCs win 100 seats, and perhaps no other party wins 12.
Yeah.
So,
But if they're down to that 42,
yeah, it's a different story, huh?
it's a different story. Then they're they're still looking at a good result, 85 to 90 seats, so gains. But then the Liberals probably are winning a Mississauga or two, including Bonnie Crombie's. They're probably, because often with the Liberals at 32, the NDP is quite low. They're probably picking up those seats in Toronto. The NDP being too low, they lose London, they lose Windsor, they might even lose Hamilton. So the NDP gets dropped down. Those go to the PCs primarily. So it's like a 3D chess thing going on here, right? Because the Liberal path to official opposition runs a little bit through the PCs taking NDP seats in the Southwest, because the Liberals can't do it. And it requires the Liberals to win in Toronto, which the numbers would seem to suggest they could do. We don't really know exactly whether the NDP vote is very concentrated in the downtown core, and they completely tanked in Etobicoke and York and Scarborough. So that we don't know. But yeah, I don't know what to me, the Liberals, to me, they could be anywhere from 10 to 20, and 10 to 20 means everything from official party status to non-official party status to official opposition to not official opposition. To me, that's the big question. Whether the PCs get 85 or 95 seats, to me, is a bit immaterial. It doesn't really matter. That's just extra cushion padding of that majority. Is just doesn't actually give the PCs anything extra to have an extra 10 MPPs at the Queen's Park.
Let me ask you this, Eric. So on Monday, we recorded our special episode about the Ontario election. If you're not a member of the podcast, check it out. It was fun. We did a projection meeting, went all through all 124 ridings in Ontario. And at the end, our average, it was 91 seats for the PCs.
Yeah.
So, Eric, over under, with those new numbers that you see this morning, because we only had the data until Sunday night, if I gave you a 91.5 line for the number of PC seats, where would you go?
I honestly struggle a lot with it. Because if I would just go by the polls, I think on the whole, the fact that the Liberals have jumped up to 28 to 32, so maybe around 30%, might limit the PC gains. So, I would take the under. But then I kind of expect the PCs to beat the polls. Right?
if they beat Léger, if Léger is 47, if they could get 49% in this election. And then what?
Oh, I don't know.
I know where I'm going.
I'll take a mild under.
I'm taking the over.
Okay.
Not overwhelming over. Of course, 2 days from now, the PCs have won 103 seats, and then we look foolish. But I think 91 was a good consensual number. Looking at these numbers this morning, Nanos, Léger 47, 46, Relay 48. Yeah, the IVRs have the PCs lower.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to see the Palace. The Palace data will also have a final poll sometime today. And Palace is the IVR that has had the PCs the highest. So it's not just a mode effect. I think I'm going to go with the over because I think the PCs will beat their polls by a tiny bit, and it could matter a whole lot.
So who wins official opposition?
Oh, man. So do you believe the NDP? Okay, so NDP polls right now, I have the list here. 17, 18, 17, 16, 19, 18. If you believe the NDP will underperform and have a 15.5 or something, it's the Liberals. If the NDP holds its own and is just under 20 or at 20, for sure it's the NDP. I have a feeling that the NDP will underperform because they often do. Not by much, right? Not by much, within a margin. So I think I would go with the Liberals, but my website's not showing this right now. My website's showing the NDP above by a few points. It's just I'm going with the average. So I don't know.
I've had the Liberals pretty consistently in official opposition. I think the NDP, I think they're in danger. It feels like they also are worried about it. And so that being the case, I'm going to give it to the OLP, but I do not feel very confident about the particulars of the election. Pretty confident that Doug Ford is going to win another mandate.
Oh, you heard it here first, my friends. There you go.
Yeah, we're not doing a live stream because we're just going to call it right now. The decision desk, the numbers decision desk is calling a PC majority government.
Oh, it's still going to be interesting to see the dynamics. Do the regionals change? Has the map changed, or is it just blue everywhere, right? Will the PCs underperform in some places, like the North, where we have very little information? We think, in all logic, the PCs would do better in the North because we look at other conservative parties throughout the country doing well in rural areas. But we'll find out on Thursday night. So,
all right, I wanted to touch on one last thing.
Yeah.
In the last week, we had two premiers resign.
That's right.
Did we choose either of them as a premier that was resigning this year?
So
one of us must have chosen Fury. Anyway, the ones are Dennis King of Prince Edward Island and Andrew Fury of Newfoundland and Labrador announced, to the surprise of seemingly everybody, that they were calling it quits.
So Mr. King in PEI, I don't think we mentioned it in our podcast around Christmas about the leader resignation. He's leading a comfortable majority. He could have stayed if he wanted. But this seems to be personal and family reasons and health reasons, so we hope everything is okay. But Mr. Fury, I picked him in the draft, and by the way, I'm leading 3-0 in that draft, so I'm looking good right now.
Who do you got? You have Firstino, Trudeau, and now Fury.
Fury.
I'm not going to catch up. I don't think so.
Well, you're still waiting on Monsieur Legault. Well, thing is, you'll probably have Jack Meeting, but that's going to get ahead of ourselves. Monsieur Fury, I picked him because I figured he could lose. I did not think that he would resign 6 months before an election. Why did he resign? I mean, the very little polling data that we had in Newfoundland showed that the Liberals were doing okay. They were competitive. They were not heading towards an automatic or assured defeat. So this seems to be, again, a personal decision. He's been premier for
only 5 years, not even 5 years.
Yeah.
Just because of the reasoning for it. So for King, he's giving him his successor a lot of time. The next election, PEI, is only scheduled for 2027. But in Newfoundland and Labrador, the rule is when a premier resigns and a new one is sworn in, there has to be an election within 6 months. So if he decided to stick around and then decided he wanted to leave in a year or two after the election, they'd have to have another election pretty soon. Yeah. So it does actually focus the mind, I think, for Newfoundland and Labrador premiers. Do you want to commit for a full term? Because otherwise you're going to cause an election if you resign. So that makes some sense to me, that if he felt he didn't have it in him for another 4 years, that he shouldn't lead the party into the next election. But it is still kind of surprising. Both of them seem to be relatively well placed in and not there for very long. But hey, difficult job, and I can understand if you just don't want to do it anymore.
That's true. It's better that than to mail it in, right? Like you can't be a premier or a prime minister and do some quiet quitting or whatever it's called, right? So yeah, good luck in their next endeavors to both gentlemen.
Do you have a quiz this week, or we move to the number?
I do not have a quiz because there's just too much happening, but there will be other quizzes very soon. It's just this week is just insane. So yeah,
okay.
Number of the week.
What's your number of the week?
My number of the week, I go back to the Léger poll with Mark Carney. 50% for the Liberals in BC. Like, what the hell? I mean, we saw in previous polls, the Liberals doing better in BC. This is not like a fluke. This seems really high. So it's 50% Liberal, 30% Conservative, 15% NDP in British Columbia. And so that really surprised me. So I looked at past polls, and Léger has them high, Ipsos has them high. And so if the Liberals win 50% in BC, that's a lot of seats that we did not expect them to pick up. So I'm looking forward to see that, because if the election comes to be very close, if the election is a minority and both parties make gains at the expense of the smaller parties, we could have to wait until Pacific time to see what happens in BC. So I will focus on these numbers a bit. What about you?
Okay, my number of the week is going to be 44. That was the turnout in the Ontario election in 2022. And the question is whether it will actually be any higher or any lower in this election. I don't have a lot of faith that it will be higher, but we'll see. And I hope that more people go out to vote. In a world where democracy is under assault, at least go out and vote in your Ontario provincial election. It's the least we can ask. So I'm sure everybody watching, listening to this will go out and vote, but go and tell your friends, your family to also go out and make it a road trip. Go together. It'll be fun.
It's also
grab some lunch, grab some breakfast. You make it a day.
Absolutely. They manage schools, hospitals, roads, and stuff like that. It matters a whole lot, right? So please, go vote.
All right, so that will be taking place on Thursday, and on Friday morning we'll have our reaction episode, a little quick one in the morning. We are going to record our mailbag episode just next. We got some questions on, guess what, Mark Carney, the Ontario election. Got some other ones too, so if you want to listen to that, go to thenumberspod.ca. And you can also listen to our special episode on the Ontario election. As Philippe mentioned, we went across every riding, made a projection for each of them. So if you want to listen to that before Thursday, join the Patreon at thenumberspod.ca. All right, Philippe, we're going to chat in a couple days. And until then, enjoy the election.
And enjoy CBC Radio. I will tune in to see how well you do. So.
Tune in with your ears.